Welcome to Void Case Files, where we investigate the darkest corners of the unexplained and uncover stories that law enforcement won't talk about. Before we dive in, look at this. 93.8% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. That number right there on your screen. If you're into real unexplained cases that authorities try to bury, hit that subscribe button right now. We're pushing for 1,000 subscribers by New Year's, and we're posting daily to get there. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Tonight's case is different. Tonight I'm going to tell you about Highway 287 in Wyoming and what happened to a state trooper named Ryan Holloway on October 13th, 2023. This isn't folklore. This isn't an urban legend passed down through generations. This is documented. The case file exists, the recordings exist, the testimony exists, and after tonight, you'll understand why some roads carry reputations that go far beyond their accident statistics. What you're about to hear is real, and it will change how you think about the open road after dark. Highway 287 cuts a lonely path through some of the most isolated territory in the American West. 65 miles between Laramie, Wyoming and Fort Collins, Colorado. During daylight hours, it's almost beautiful, the high plains stretching endlessly in every direction, the Rocky Mountains rising like ancient sentinels in the distance, the sky so vast and blue it makes you feel insignificant in the best possible way. But at night, Highway 287 transforms into something else entirely. The locals don't call it by its highway number after dark. They have another name for it, one that's been whispered in truck stops and diners throughout Wyoming and northern Colorado for decades. They call it the Highway of Death, and they're not being dramatic. Between 2017 and 2024, just the 30-mile Colorado section south of the Wyoming border saw hundreds of crashes. 13 of those were fatal, claiming 18 lives. The Wyoming side tells an equally grim story: twisted metal, broken glass, and families forever shattered by a single moment of inattention or bad luck. The statistics are public record, available to anyone who wants to look. But what those numbers don't capture is the feeling you get when you drive that highway alone at night. The isolation is profound, almost oppressive. Jeffrey City sits roughly halfway along the route, a uranium mining boom town that went bust in the 80s. What was once a thriving community of 4,000 people is now home to maybe 60 souls who refuse to leave. The abandoned buildings stand like tombstones marking the death of American industrial optimism. When you drive through Jeffrey City at night, most of the structures are dark, empty. The wind howls through broken windows. And if you stop, if you're brave enough or foolish enough to get out of your car, you can feel the weight of all that emptiness pressing down on you. Beyond Jeffrey City, the isolation gets worse. You can drive 122 miles in some directions without seeing another town, another gas station, another functioning business. Just darkness, wind that never stops howling across the high plains, and the certainty that if something goes wrong out here, if your car breaks down, if you have a medical emergency, if you're involved in an accident, help is very, very far away. The highway itself presents constant challenges. Undivided lanes snake through blind curves where you can't see oncoming traffic until it's almost too late. Wildlife, deer, elk, even the occasional moose, crosses without warning, and hitting an animal at highway speed can be fatal. The weather can shift from clear to lethal in minutes, especially during winter, when ground blizzards turn the road into a white void where you literally cannot see your own hood. And then there are the human factors. Drivers who speed because the empty road makes them feel invincible. Truckers who've been on the road too long and fight to stay awake. Drunk drivers who've made terrible choices and are about to make those choices everyone else's problem. Night patrol on Highway 287 is considered the worst assignment in the Wyoming Highway Patrol. The official reason is obvious. The isolation, the accident rate, the long hours alone in the dark, responding to scenes that are often fatal. But there's another reason, one that doesn't appear in any official documentation. The veterans know it. The troopers who've worked Highway 287 for years know it. They just don't talk about it. There's a feeling that settles over you out there when you're alone in your patrol car at 2 in the morning. A sense that you're being watched by something that has no business existing. Most troopers convince themselves it's just their imagination, just the isolation playing tricks on their mind. They finish their shift, go home and try to forget about it. But some troopers see more than just shadows and empty highway. Some troopers encounter something that changes them forever. To understand what happened to Ryan Holloway in October 2023, you need to know about September 16th, 2001. You need to understand the tragedy that changed Highway 287 forever. It was 5 days after September 11th. The entire nation was in shock, struggling to process events that seemed too enormous, too terrible to be real. The University of Wyoming had closed its campus. Classes were cancelled. Students wandered around in a daze, watching the news coverage on repeat, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become much darker and more dangerous. 8 members of the university's cross-country team decided they needed to get away from campus for a few hours. They were young men, all of them in their late teens or early 20s. They'd trained together, competed together, become close friends through the shared suffering that distance running demands. That evening, they piled into a Jeep Wagoneer and drove down to Fort Collins. They wanted to feel normal for a little while. Buy running shoes, get something to eat, go dancing, try to remember what it felt like to be young and carefree instead of Americans wondering if the world was ending. Their names were Justin Lambert Belanger, 20 years old, from Timmins, Ontario, a Canadian who'd come to Wyoming on a running scholarship far from home with a bright future ahead of him. Cody Brown, 21, from Hudson, Colorado, known for his infectious laugh and his ability to push through pain in the final miles of a race. Kyle Johnson, 20, from Riverton, Wyoming, a local kid who'd grown up running on these same high plains. Joshua Jones, 22, from Salem, Oregon, the oldest of the group, a senior who'd been planning to go to graduate school. Morgan McClelland, 21, from Gillette, Wyoming, quiet, intense, the kind of runner who made everyone around him better. Kevin Salverson, 19, from Cheyenne, a freshman just starting his college career, with his whole life spread out before him like an unwritten book. Nicholas Chabron, 20, from Laramie, running on his hometown roads, familiar with every curve and straightaway, and Shane Shatter, 19, from Douglas, Wyoming. The driver that night, responsible, careful, doing everything right. 8 teammates, 8 friends, 8 young men with families who loved them, with dreams they were working toward, with futures that seemed bright and limitless. Around 1:30 in the morning on September 16th, they were heading home. They were 17 miles south of Laramie, near a tiny unincorporated community called Tie Siding. Barely a dot on the map, just a few scattered ranches and a whole lot of empty space. The night was clear. Shane was driving carefully, probably a little tired but alert. They were talking, laughing, maybe making plans for the week ahead. Just normal college kids heading home after a night out. That's when Clinton Haskins crossed the center line. Haskins was 21 years old, a University of Wyoming student like the 8 runners. He was on the rodeo team, a steer wrestler. That night, he'd been drinking. His blood alcohol content was 0.16, twice the legal limit at the time. He was driving a 1-ton Chevrolet pickup truck southbound on Highway 287, heading toward Colorado. For reasons he's never been able to fully explain, because that's how drunk driving works, you make decisions that defy explanation. He drifted left of center. His massive pickup truck crossed into the northbound lane. Shane Chateau, driving the Jeep Wagoneer, had no time to react, no time to swerve, no time to brake. At highway speed, the 2 vehicles met in a head-on collision that investigators later described as unsurvivable. The physics were simple and brutal. 2 vehicles traveling at high speed toward each other, combined impact force equivalent to hitting a wall at over 100 miles per hour. All 8 runners died instantly. The medical examiner's report said they didn't suffer. That's what they always say, trying to give the families some small comfort. Whether it's true or not doesn't really matter. They were alive one moment, young men with their whole lives ahead of them, and dead the next. Clinton Haskins survived. He walked away from the wreckage with injuries that would heal. His passenger, because yes, he had a passenger that night, another UW student who'd made the terrible decision to get in a car with a drunk driver, also survived. The news broke across Wyoming like a shockwave. The entire state was already reeling from 9/11. Now, They had to process this. 8 young athletes killed by a drunk driver, a tragedy that was completely preventable, that never should have happened. The University of Wyoming held a memorial service. 3,500 people attended. They rang a bell 8 times, once for each runner. The entire cross-country team was destroyed, gone in a single instant of twisted metal and shattered dreams. Dave Salverson, Kevin's father, had always hated Highway 287. Before the accident, he'd nearly been killed on it twice. Once, a reckless driver had nearly run him off the road into a ditch. Another time, he'd been driving during winter when an 18-wheeler started sliding on black ice, fishtailing across both lanes. Dave had missed being crushed by about 20 seconds. Had I been 20 seconds ahead, that thing would have taken us out, he told reporters years later. After those experiences, Dave had instituted a strict family rule. He told his children, "You stay away from 287. It's no good. Find another route. I don't care if it takes longer. That highway is cursed." But Kevin didn't follow the rule that night. He was young. He was with friends. The route through Highway 287 was the fastest way home. He probably didn't even think about his father's warning. At 3 o'clock in the morning on September 16th, 2001, a deputy sheriff knocked on Dave Salverson's door. The moment Dave opened it and saw the officer's face, he knew, before a single word was spoken, he knew his son was gone. That knock on the door, that moment when everything changes forever, that instant when your world divides into before and after, that's what Dave Salverson experienced, and he would spend the rest of his life reliving it, wondering if Kevin would still be alive, if he'd just listened, if he'd just taken a different road home. A memorial went up at the crash site within days. A simple wooden cross, 8 feet tall with 8 pairs of running shoes draped over the arms. The shoes represented each runner, worn training shoes, race flats, the tools of their sport and their passion. People started leaving flowers immediately. Yellow roses, white lilies, handwritten notes. You are not forgotten. Run free in heaven. Forever young. 23 years later, fresh flowers still appear regularly at that memorial. On the anniversary of the crash every September, people gather for a remembrance run, 8 miles for 8 young men. In Gillette, Morgan McClellan's hometown, they hold an annual 8-mile run in his memory. The University of Wyoming swimming and diving teams, because yes, more UW athletes would later die on this same stretch of highway. Many of them have tattoos commemorating the 8 runners. Small memorial tattoos on their ribs or ankles bearing the date or the initials or simply the number 8. The tragedy led to changes. Wyoming lowered its blood alcohol limit from 0.10 to 0.08 in 2002. The state finally banned open containers in vehicles in 2007, one of the last states in the nation to do so. The Wyoming Department of Transportation began a $9 million project in 2009 to widen 4 miles of Highway 287 near Tie Siding, including the stretch where the accident occurred. They installed a median barrier, added rumble strips, improved lighting. The old section of highway was seeded over, grass struggling to grow in the wind-swept high plains, trying to erase the memory of what happened there. But the memorial remains. The shoes are replaced when they get too weathered, the flowers keep coming, and the stories started almost immediately. People driving Highway 287 late at night began reporting something strange. They'd see figures walking along the shoulder near the memorial, 8 figures in running clothes, moving north toward Laramie. Always 8 of them, always in running gear, always heading home. At first the reports were dismissed. Grief makes people see things. Guilt, especially from drivers who'd been drinking and saw themselves in Clinton Haskins, can play tricks on the mind. But the reports kept coming, year after year. Different people, different nights, different weather conditions. Always the same description. 8 runners walking north on Highway 287, trying to make it home. Some people say the spirits of those 8 young men never left the highway. That they're trapped there, endlessly replaying that final journey, searching for an ending different from the one they got. But there's something else out there too. Something that appeared after that September night and never left. Something that's not human, never was human, but has taken it upon itself to prevent more tragedies on the highway of death. And that brings us to Ryan Holloway. In October 2023, Ryan Holloway was 34 years old and everything you'd want in a Wyoming state trooper. His personnel file was exemplary. 11 years of service without a single serious complaint or disciplinary action, commendations for handling difficult situations with professionalism and restraint, citations for going above and beyond, like the time he pulled a driver from a burning vehicle seconds before it exploded, or the winter night he stayed with a stranded family for 4 hours until a tow truck could reach them through a ground blizzard. His colleagues described him as unflappable, the kind of officer who stayed calm when everyone else was panicking, the kind of partner you wanted when responding to a dangerous call. Rational, logical, by the book. He didn't believe in ghosts or UFOs or government conspiracies. He was a husband and father of 2 daughters, ages 7 and 9. He coached his older daughter's soccer team. He helped with homework. He was, by all accounts, completely ordinary in the best possible way, a good man doing a necessary job. Holloway actually volunteered for night shifts on Highway 287. Most troopers avoided them if they could. The isolation, the darkness, the grim frequency of fatal accidents, it wore on you psychologically. But Holloway didn't mind. He was a night owl anyway. Felt more alert after midnight than he ever did during the day. And the pay differential for working nights helped with the mortgage and the girls' college funds. He knew about the 2001 tragedy. Every trooper who worked Highway 287 knew about it. The story was told to rookies as a cautionary tale about the dangers of drunk driving, about why traffic enforcement mattered. Holloway passed the memorial regularly on his patrols. Sometimes he'd see fresh flowers gleaming in his headlights. Once in a while, he'd see people standing there, family members paying their respects, runners from the university laying new shoes on the cross. It always reminded him that his job was about more than just writing speeding tickets. It was about preventing another family from losing everything in a single moment of twisted metal and grief. Friday, October 13th, 2023. The date itself should have been an omen, but Holloway wasn't superstitious. He started his shift at 10 p.m., rolling out of the Laramie station in his assigned patrol car, Unit 47. Friday nights were usually busy on Highway 287, college students traveling between Laramie and Fort Collins, people heading to Denver for the weekend, truckers hauling loads through the night. But from the moment Holloway pulled onto the highway, something felt different. The traffic was unusually light, almost non-existent. In the first hour, he saw maybe 6 vehicles total. For a Friday night, that was strange. The weather was clear and cold, 41 degrees with no moon. The darkness beyond his headlights was absolute, the kind of darkness city people never experience, where the night is so complete it feels solid, oppressive, like you're driving through an ocean of ink. At 11:47 p.m., Holloway made his first stop of the night, a pickup truck doing 78 in a 65 zone. Nothing dramatic. The driver was apologetic. Young guy, probably mid-20s, said he was heading home to Fort Collins and wasn't paying attention to his speed. Clean record. Holloway could have written him a ticket but decided on a warning instead. Something about the young man reminded him of those 8 runners. Same age, same college kid energy. "Slow down," Holloway told him. "Get home safe. Nothing's worth dying for on this highway." The driver thanked him, promised to watch his speed, and drove off. Holloway watched his taillights disappear into the darkness, heading south toward Colorado. At 12:33 a.m., Holloway stopped to help an elderly couple with a flat tire. They were from Nebraska, driving through Wyoming on their way to visit their daughter in Laramie. The husband was probably in his 70s, struggling with the lug nuts, clearly not having changed a tire in years. Holloway took over, changed the tire for them, made sure the spare was properly inflated, and would get them safely to Laramie. The wife tried to tip him $20. He refused. "Just doing my job, Mom. You folks drive careful now." By 1:15 a.m., dispatch had been quiet for over an hour. Holloway was cruising at patrol speed, watching for any vehicles that needed attention, but the highway was eerily empty. He was thinking this might actually be an easy shift. Maybe he'd get lucky. Maybe it would be one of those rare nights where nothing dramatic happened, where everyone drove safely and got where they were going without incident. He drove past the memorial for the 8 runners. Someone had left fresh flowers, yellow roses gleaming bright in his headlights against the weathered wood of the cross. The sight always made him pause, made him think about those young men and how quickly everything can change. That's when the temperature inside his patrol car dropped. Suddenly, dramatically. One moment, the heater was working fine, keeping the cabin comfortable. The next moment, it felt like someone had opened a door to winter. Holloway could see his breath fogging in the air. He checked the heater controls, still set to high, still blowing hot air. But the temperature kept dropping, and he felt something else, something he'd never experienced before in all his years patrolling this highway. A presence. Not threatening exactly, but undeniable. Like he wasn't alone in the car. Like something was sitting in the back seat watching him. He glanced in his rearview mirror. Empty back seat. Nothing there but shadows. He told himself it was just his imagination. The isolation, the darkness, the late hour. They could play tricks on your mind. Everyone who worked nights knew that. You'd start seeing things that weren't there, hearing sounds that had no source. It was normal. Nothing to worry about. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger as he continued north. At 1:41 a.m., about 2 miles north of the memorial, Holloway spotted something on the shoulder that made him slow down. A silver Honda Accord, sitting perfectly positioned on the gravel shoulder. No hazard lights flashing, no visible damage to the vehicle, just sitting there in the darkness like someone had parked it there intentionally and walked away. As Holloway got closer, he noticed something that immediately triggered his instincts. The car wasn't pulled over hastily the way a disabled vehicle would be. It was positioned with almost geometric precision, exactly 3 feet from the white line, perfectly straight, parallel to the highway, as if someone had used measuring equipment to place it there exactly right. Holloway activated his light bar and pulled in behind the Honda, called it in to dispatch. Unit 47, I've got a possible abandoned vehicle, Highway 287, mile marker 152, silver Honda Accord, license plate Alpha Bravo, Charlie 4739, running a check on the plates now. The response came back within seconds. The Honda was registered as a rental from Enterprise Rent-A-Car in Denver. It had been rented 3 weeks ago under a weekly contract. Should have been returned 2 weeks ago. The rental company had filed a report with Denver police for a stolen vehicle. Copy that, dispatch. I'm going to check it out. Vehicle appears unoccupied. Holloway grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of his patrol car. The wind hit him immediately. Wyoming wind, relentless and cold, carrying the smell of sagebrush and dust. He approached the Honda with standard caution, flashlight in his left hand, right hand resting near his service weapon. You never knew what you were walking into with an abandoned vehicle. Sometimes it was just a breakdown. Sometimes it was something worse. The driver's side door was unlocked. That was the first unusual thing. Holloway pulled it open and shined his flashlight inside. Keys were in the ignition. That was the second unusual thing. Who leaves their keys in an abandoned car? He reached in and tried to start the engine. Dead. Completely dead. He touched the hood. Stone cold. This car hadn't been running for hours, maybe all day. But when he shined his flashlight on the driver's seat, he noticed something that made his skin prickle. The fabric was indented, as if someone had been sitting there recently, and when he placed his hand on the seat, it was warm. Not hot, but warm. Body temperature warm. Like someone had been sitting there within the last 30 minutes. How could the seat still be warm if the engine was stone cold, and the car had clearly been sitting here for hours? Holloway pulled back, suddenly uneasy. He played his flashlight over the rest of the interior. The driver's seat was adjusted for someone tall, all the way back, pushed as far as it would go. Had to be for someone at least 6'2", maybe taller. Cell phone on the passenger seat, screen cracked but still showing battery life, 19%. Half-empty water bottle in the cup holder, condensation still on the plastic, like it had been cold recently. Registration and insurance card in the glove box, showing the rental agreement was signed by a Thomas Westfield of Denver, Colorado. But no wallet. No purse. No identification. No explanation for why this car was sitting here, or where the driver had gone. Holloway checked the back seat. Empty. Popped the trunk. Also empty. No luggage, no personal items, nothing. No blood, no signs of struggle, no indication of foul play. Just an abandoned rental car with a warm seat and cold engine, sitting perfectly positioned on the shoulder of Highway 287 in the middle of the night. He called it in. Dispatch, Unit 47, vehicle appears abandoned. Keys in ignition, engine won't start. No sign of the driver. I'm going to check the surrounding area, see if they wandered off or are nearby needing assistance. Copy that. 47. Do you need backup? Holloway hesitated. For what? An abandoned car? Negative, dispatch. I'll let you know if I find anything. He began walking around the vehicle, playing his flashlight beam over the ground. That's when he found the footprints. They led away from the driver's side door, pressed into the dirt and gravel of the shoulder. But these weren't normal footprints. They were too deep, pressed into the ground with enormous force, as if whoever made them weighed several hundred pounds. Yet they were barefoot prints, clearly human in shape, 5 toes, definite heel and arch. But large, very large, size 14 at least, maybe 15. Who walks barefoot in 40-degree weather? Who walks barefoot on gravel and dirt that would be painful even in boots? Holloway followed the trail. The prints were spaced far apart, like whoever made them was taking long strides. He followed them about 30 yards from the Honda, past the fence line that separated the highway from open rangeland. The prints continued across hard-packed dirt, each one clear and distinct in his flashlight beam. Then, in the middle of a flat open area with no rocks, no grass, no obstacles of any kind, the footprints just stopped. Not faded gradually, not obscured by wind or terrain, they just ended, as if whoever was making them had simply ceased to exist mid-stride. Holloway stood there, flashlight playing over the spot where the last footprint was stamped into the dirt. Beyond it, nothing. Just empty ground stretching into darkness. He walked in a circle around the final print, looking for any continuation, any sign of where the person might have gone. Nothing. It was as if they'd evaporated into the night air. The wind picked up, and Holloway caught a smell that made him pause. Sagebrush? Yes, that was everywhere. But something else, something organic and wrong, like earth from a freshly dug grave, like wet soil and decay. He'd smelled that scent before at accident scenes, at fatalities where the victim had been dead for a while before being discovered. But there was no body here, no explanation for that smell. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Holloway walked back to his patrol car, his instincts screaming that something was very wrong about this entire situation. He got on the radio again. Dispatch, Unit 47, I need backup at my location. Possible missing person situation. Found footprints leading away from the vehicle, but no sign of the driver. Prints just end in the middle of nowhere. Copy that. 47. Nearest unit is... Let me check. Unit 39 is about 30 minutes from your location. Can you wait for backup? Affirmative. I'll secure the scene. 30 minutes. Holloway settled into his patrol car to wait, positioning it so he could watch the Honda through his windshield. He left his light bar running, the red and blue lights strobing across the empty highway and the abandoned car. He filled out preliminary paperwork, documenting everything he'd found, took photos with his phone of the Honda, the footprints, the surrounding area. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not from the darkness beyond the fence line, not from the highway, from the Honda itself. He stared at the car, and the longer he stared, the more wrong it felt. Something about it wasn't right. It was too perfect, too precisely placed, like it was staged, like it was bait. That's when the Honda's interior dome light flickered on. Holloway sat up straight, hand moving to his weapon. Nobody had touched the car. He was watching it. The doors were closed, but the light was on. It stayed illuminated for exactly 8 seconds. Holloway counted them, his training taking over, documenting everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then the light went dark. Holloway's heart was pounding now. He grabbed his radio. Dispatch. Something's going on with this vehicle. Interior light just came on by itself. Static. Heavy static filled the channel. He could barely make out the dispatcher's response, just fragments of words through the interference. "Dispatch, say again. You're breaking up." More static, then nothing. The radio went completely dead. Holloway tried his cell phone. No signal. Out here in the middle of nowhere, that wasn't unusual. Cell coverage was spotty at best along this stretch of highway. But his radio should work. The radio always worked. It was designed specifically for these remote areas. He was reaching to try the radio again when he glanced at his rearview mirror. Someone was sitting in the Honda's driver's seat. Holloway's breath caught in his throat. A tall figure, head nearly touching the ceiling of the car. Dark jacket, jeans, human-shaped. But even from 50 feet away, even in the strobing light from his light bar, Holloway could see that something about the figure was wrong. The proportions weren't right. The shoulders were too wide. The arms seemed too long. Training overrode fear. Holloway exited his patrol car, flashlight in his left hand, right hand on his weapon. "Wyoming Highway Patrol," he called out, his voice carrying across the empty highway. "Step out of the vehicle. Show me your hands." The figure didn't move. "This is the Highway Patrol. Exit the vehicle now. Keep your hands where I can see them." Nothing. No response. No movement. Holloway approached, adrenaline surging through his system. Every instinct he'd developed over 11 years of law enforcement was telling him to wait for backup, to not approach alone. But he had a job to do. Someone was in that car. They might need help. They might be injured or in distress. He got closer, his flashlight beam playing through the driver's side window. "Sir or ma'am, I need you to respond. Are you injured? Do you need medical assistance?" The figure's head turned slowly toward him, and Ryan Holloway saw something that would shatter his understanding of reality. In the testimony he gave later, recorded in a confidential session with a departmental psychologist and a Wyoming Highway Patrol supervisor, never meant to be released but obtained through sources I can't reveal, Holloway struggled to find words for what he saw. You can hear it in his voice on the recording, the way it shakes, the way he stops mid-sentence, unable to continue, the way he sounds like a man who's seen something that broke him. "It was like looking at a person through water," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But the water was everywhere. The water was reality itself, and this thing was on the other side, pressing through, like reality is a membrane, and this thing was pushing against it from somewhere else, distorting everything around it just by existing. The face was wrong, not deformed, not masked, not burned or injured, just fundamentally, cosmically incorrect. The geometry was off in ways that hurt to look at. The eyes appeared to be in the right place, but they also seemed to be looking at him from multiple angles simultaneously, from the front, from the side, from above and below all at once. Impossible perspectives collapsed into a single viewpoint that made Holloway's brain scream that this couldn't be real. The skin, if you could call it skin, shifted between pale white and shadow black, never settling on either, constantly in flux like it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. There was a mouth, or the suggestion of a mouth, but it existed and didn't exist at the same time. Sometimes it was there, sometimes it was gone, sometimes it was both. And the proportions. God, the proportions. Everything was wrong. The neck was too long, the shoulders were too wide. The arms, pressed against the sides of the body, extended past where human arms should end. The hands hanging down almost to the knees. Holloway stumbled backward, his flashlight beam going wild as his hand shook. He felt his breakfast trying to come up, his body's instinctive rejection of something that shouldn't exist. He grabbed for his radio, muscle memory taking over, training asserting itself despite the terror flooding his system. "Dispatch 47, I need backup now, I need..." Static, just harsh, electronic static, like the scream of something that had never been alive. He looked back at the Honda. The figure was standing outside the car. Holloway didn't see a door open, didn't hear the creak of hinges or the click of a latch. One moment, the thing was sitting in the driver's seat. The next moment, it was standing beside the vehicle, fully visible in the strobing lights of his patrol car. It was impossibly tall, 7 feet at least, maybe more. The proportions that seemed wrong when it was sitting were horrifying when it was standing. Arms that hung down past the knees, legs that bent slightly backward at the knee like a bird's legs, A torso that was too long, vertebrae visible through the fabric of its clothing, or what looked like clothing, because now that Holloway could see it fully, he wasn't sure if it was wearing clothes or if the clothes were part of it, grown from its body like feathers or scales. The thing's head tilted to the side, that impossible face turned toward Holloway, studying him, evaluating him. And that's when Ryan Holloway did something that he would be ashamed of for the rest of his life. Something that went against every bit of his training, every oath he'd taken, every principle he'd built his career on. He ran. He turned and ran back to his patrol car, like a frightened child running from monsters in the dark. Yanked the door open, threw himself inside, hit the lock button with a trembling hand. His fingers fumbled with the keys, dropping them once, twice, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip them. The entity moved toward him, but it didn't walk. Not the way humans walk, with a smooth transfer of weight from one leg to the other, a natural rhythm of motion. Instead, it stuttered, jerked. Like reality itself was skipping frames, dropping pieces of the entity's movement. It was standing by the Honda, then it was 5 feet closer, then it was 10 feet closer. Then it was right at his window. Holloway never saw it cross the distance. His eyes were open the entire time, focused directly on the thing. But between one blink and the next, it had moved closer, like frames were missing from existence itself. The entity pressed its face against the driver's side window. Those impossible eyes stared at him from every angle at once. That mouth that was there and wasn't there opened, or seemed to open, or did something that Holloway's brain interpreted as opening, even though it defied the laws of physics. Holloway screamed, actually screamed, the sound raw and primal, the sound of a human confronted with something that destroyed every assumption about how the world worked. He finally got the key in the ignition, started the engine, threw the car into reverse. His tires screamed on the asphalt as he accelerated backward, putting distance between himself and the thing. 50 feet, 100 feet. He checked his rearview mirror to see where he was going. The entity was standing directly behind his patrol car, right in his path. But it was also still at his window. Or was it? No, it was definitely behind the car. Except when he looked forward again, it was still beside his door. His brain couldn't process what he was seeing. The thing was in 2 places at once, or it was moving so fast his eyes couldn't track it, or reality was breaking down in ways that made spatial relationships meaningless. Holloway threw the car into drive and stomped on the gas pedal. The patrol car surged forward, engine roaring. He cranked the wheel hard, swerving around the Honda, accelerating to 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. He didn't look back. Couldn't look back. If he looked back and saw that thing behind him, saw it keeping pace with his car, or appearing in impossible places, he thought he might lose his mind completely. He drove for 2 miles at speeds that would have gotten any civilian a reckless driving charge. Finally, he forced himself to check his mirrors. Nothing. Empty highway stretching behind him into darkness. No tall figure, no impossible entity. Just the red glow of his taillights on asphalt. Holloway's breathing was ragged, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. His hands were locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white. He wanted to keep driving, to not stop until he reached Laramie or Cheyenne or even Colorado, anywhere with lights and people and normal reality. But he was a Wyoming state trooper. He'd taken an oath. And whatever that thing was, whatever impossible horror was out there on Highway 287, there was still an abandoned vehicle and a missing person, and a job that needed to be done. He reached for his radio one more time. Still static. He tried his cell phone. Still no signal. He was completely alone. That's when he felt something shift in the air inside the patrol car. The temperature dropped again, even more dramatically than before. His breath fogged in front of his face, and the smell hit him. Ozone and wet earth and decay. The smell of something that had no business being in the world of the living. Holloway looked at the passenger seat. The entity was sitting there. He didn't scream this time. His body was past that. Instead, he made a sound he'd never made before. A low, keening whimper. The sound of sanity cracking under impossible pressure. His hand spasmed on the wheel and the patrol car swerved violently across both lanes. He barely maintained control, barely kept the car on the road. The entity just sat there, motionless, head tilted at that unnatural angle, those impossible eyes watching him. Up close, Holloway could see details he wished he couldn't see. The thing's skin wasn't skin at all. It was something else, something that approximated the appearance of skin but wasn't organic, wasn't solid, wasn't anything his brain could categorize. It shifted and rippled like water, except water doesn't do that on its own. Faces appeared in the surface sometimes. Human faces, distorted and anguished, pressing up from underneath. Then they'd sink back down into whatever the entity was made of. And the smell. God, the smell was overwhelming now, filling the entire cabin of the patrol car. Ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Wet earth, like freshly turned soil in a cemetery. And underneath it all, the sweet, sick smell of advanced decay, of flesh that had been dead for weeks. Holloway drove on autopilot, his conscious mind trying desperately to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination. Maybe he'd fallen asleep at the wheel and was dreaming. Maybe he'd been in an accident and this was a dying dream, his brain's last firings before shutting down forever. Because things like this didn't exist, couldn't exist. Reality didn't work this way. Then he heard it. Not words, not exactly. More like pressure inside his skull, building and building until it took shape, formed into something his brain could interpret as language. Multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. Men, women, children, dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all saying the same thing at exactly the same time. Stop! 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 The voices were calm, not threatening, almost pleading, like someone trying to warn a child away from danger. Stop! 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 The entity raised one arm. The movement was wrong, the joints bending at angles that human joints couldn't achieve. The arm extended, impossibly long fingers pointing ahead down the highway. Holloway's eyes followed the gesture. In the distance, maybe a mile ahead, he could see brake lights. Lots of them. Red lights in the darkness. Vehicles stopped or stopping. As his patrol car ate up the distance, the scene resolved itself with horrifying clarity. A massive accident. A semi-truck jackknifed completely across both lanes. The trailer folded at a 90-degree angle to the cab. Multiple vehicles were involved. Holloway counted quickly. 5, 6 vehicles, maybe more. Fresh wreckage, metal still crumpling, glass still falling. Smoke rising from at least 2 of the vehicles. This had just happened. Seconds ago, maybe a minute at most. If Holloway had continued his normal patrol route at his normal speed, if he hadn't stopped at that Honda, if he hadn't spent 15 minutes investigating the footprints and waiting for backup, if he hadn't spent the last 5 minutes fleeing in terror, he would have been right here when this happened. He would have been travelling at highway speed, 70 or 80 miles per hour, with no time to brake, no way to avoid the collision. His patrol car would have ploughed into the wreckage. He would have been vehicle number 6 or 7 in this pileup. The physics were simple and brutal. At that speed, with that much mass involved, he almost certainly wouldn't have survived. The entity had made him stop, had delayed him, had terrified him into changing his timing, his route, his entire night. It had saved his life. Holloway looked at the passenger seat, understanding beginning to dawn through the terror. The seat was empty. The entity was gone. No trace it had ever been there. But the smell lingered in the air, fading slowly, and when Holloway looked at the passenger window, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice. A handprint, pressed into the condensation that the entity's presence had created on the glass. But the handprint was wrong. Too many fingers. He counted quickly, his mind rejecting what his eyes were seeing. 7 fingers? Maybe 8, maybe more. Each one impossibly long and thin like the legs of some enormous spider. The print was perfectly clear, every detail visible. Too clear to be his imagination. Holloway pulled his patrol car to the shoulder, 200 yards before the accident scene, put it in park, just sat there, engine running, emergency lights still flashing, staring at the chaos ahead. He could see people stumbling out of vehicles, holding their heads, their phones, trying to call for help. One car was on fire, flames beginning to spread. Someone was screaming. The sound carried across the empty highway, sharp and terrible. He should get out, should run to the scene, should start rendering aid, directing traffic, calling for backup and ambulances and fire trucks. That was his job. That was why he wore the badge. But he couldn't move. His body wouldn't respond to his brain's commands. He just sat there, hands still gripping the steering wheel, staring at the accident that should have killed him. His radio suddenly crackled back to life with perfect clarity, making him jump. All units, we have a report of a major accident on Highway 287, northbound lanes near mile marker 154. Multiple vehicles involved. All available units respond. Unit 47, what's your status? Holloway's mouth was dry. His tongue felt thick. He tried to speak, but nothing came out at first. He swallowed, tried again. Unit 47 responding, I'm on scene. We need everything. Multiple vehicles, possible fatalities, at least one vehicle fire. Send everything. Copy that. 47. Units are en route. ETA 15 to 20 minutes. 15 to 20 minutes. Holloway forced himself to move, to open his door, to step out into the cold night air. His legs were shaking, but they held him. He grabbed his first aid kit and fire extinguisher and started walking toward the accident scene. Behind him, somewhere in the darkness beyond his patrol car's lights, he felt the presence watching him. Not threatening, just there, observing, making sure he was okay. He didn't look back. The next few hours blurred together in Holloway's memory. Other units arrived. Ambulances, fire trucks. The scene was chaos. Injured people being extracted from vehicles, the jaws of life cutting through twisted metal, paramedics working frantically to stabilize victims. 4 people were already dead when Holloway arrived, killed instantly in the initial impact. 3 more were critically injured and would be lucky to survive the night. The semi-truck driver was alive, trapped in his cab with a crushed pelvis and internal injuries. While firefighters worked to free him, Holloway stood nearby and listened to him talk, half delirious from pain and shock. There was someone in the road, the driver kept saying, standing right there in my lane. Tall guy, dark clothes, just standing there. I swerved to miss him and I lost control. I didn't have a choice, he was just standing there. Where did he go? Did you find him? Did I hit him? Colorado State Patrol officers would later interview the driver after surgery. He gave the same account. Tall figure in dark clothes, standing in the middle of the northbound lane, appearing out of nowhere. The driver swerved hard to avoid hitting what he thought was a pedestrian. His trailer started fishtailing. He tried to correct but overcorrected, and the truck jackknifed. The vehicle directly behind him hit the trailer at full speed, starting the chain reaction that involved 5 other vehicles. No pedestrian was found at the scene. No body. No blood. No evidence anyone had been walking on the highway. Just the driver's testimony and the wreckage his swerve had created. As first light began to grey the eastern horizon, Holloway stood beside his patrol car, watching the tow trucks haul away the last of the wrecked vehicles. A Colorado State Patrol trooper walked over, a middle-aged guy named Matthews who Holloway had worked with before on multi-jurisdictional incidents. "Hell of a night," Matthews said, offering Holloway a cup of coffee from his thermos. Holloway accepted gratefully, his hand still shaking slightly. "Yeah? Lucky you were here. You probably saved a couple of lives getting to people as fast as you did." Holloway didn't respond. Lucky. The word felt absurd. He'd been here because something impossible had delayed him, because an entity that shouldn't exist had appeared in his patrol car and pointed down the highway warning him, saving him. "Hey, you okay?" Matthews asked, studying Holloway's face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Holloway almost laughed at that. A ghost would have been comforting. Ghosts were understandable. Ghosts fit into a framework people could process. What he'd seen was something else entirely, something worse. "I'm fine," he lied, "just tired, long night." After the scene was cleared, Holloway drove back to the location where he'd found the silver Honda. The sun was up now, morning light flooding across the high plains. The Honda was still there on the shoulder, right where he'd left it. Except now, in daylight, something looked different. Holloway got out of his patrol car and approached the vehicle, studying it carefully. The positioning was still perfect, exactly 3 feet from the white line, perfectly parallel to the highway, but in the morning light, he could see something he'd missed in darkness. There was no dust on the car. Highway 287 was a dusty road, especially in this section where the wind never stopped blowing dirt and grit across the asphalt. Every vehicle that sat here for more than an hour would accumulate a visible layer of dust. But the Honda looked freshly washed, spotless. He tried the driver's door. Still unlocked, keys still in the ignition. He tried starting it, not really expecting it to work. The engine turned over immediately, started right up, running smoothly. Holloway sat there, hands still on the key, trying to understand. Last night, the engine had been completely dead. Now, it started perfectly. He checked the gas gauge, 3/4 full, oil pressure normal, temperature normal, every system functioning exactly as it should. He turned off the engine, removed the keys, and walked to where he'd found the footprints last night. In the daylight, they should have been even more visible, but when he reached the spot, the ground was undisturbed. Smooth dirt and gravel, no impressions, no indication anyone had walked there. The footprints were gone, not faded, not filled in by wind, just gone, as if they'd never existed. Holloway stood there for a long time, morning sun warming his face, staring at ground that should have held evidence of something impossible. He took photos anyway, documenting the Honda, the surrounding area, everything. Then he called for a tow truck to impound the vehicle for investigation. While he waited, he walked back to his patrol car and looked at the passenger window. In the harsh light of morning, the handprint should have been clearly visible if it was real. The window was clean. No condensation, no handprint, no evidence of the entity that had sat there, watching him with those impossible eyes. Wyoming Highway Patrol sent a supervisor out to meet the tow truck. Sergeant Wade Fletcher, a 20-year veteran who'd seen everything there was to see in highway patrol work. He took one look at Holloway and frowned. "When's the last time you slept?" "Yesterday afternoon," Holloway said. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you've been through a meat grinder. Go home, get some sleep. We'll handle the paperwork on this abandoned vehicle." "I need to..." "That's not a suggestion, Trooper. You've been on duty for over 10 hours, half of that dealing with a major fatal accident. You're exhausted. Go home. Be with your family. That's an order." Holloway wanted to argue, but knew it was pointless. And honestly, he wanted nothing more than to get away from Highway 287, away from that stretch of road where reality didn't work right, away from the memories of what he'd seen. He drove home to Laramie as the sun climbed higher, normal morning traffic building on the highway. College students heading to class, commuters going to work, trucks hauling goods, normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that something impossible existed in the darkness just beyond their headlights. Holloway's wife, Amanda, was awake when he got home, making breakfast for their daughters before school. She took one look at his face and her smile faded. "Ryan, what happened?" "Long night, bad accident, I'm okay." But he wasn't okay. She could see it. Their daughters could see it. He hugged them both tight, holding on longer than usual, feeling their small, warm bodies against him, grateful to be alive, grateful for the ordinary miracle of another morning. After Amanda took the girls to school, Holloway tried to sleep. Lay in their bed, curtains drawn, the room dark and quiet. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw that face. Those eyes looking at him from impossible angles. That mouth that existed and didn't exist. He'd lie there for a few minutes, then his eyes would snap open, heart racing, breath coming fast. Finally, he gave up. Got out of bed and went to his home office. Opened his laptop and started searching. Highway 287 accident history. Highway 287 deaths. Highway 287 haunted. Highway 287 paranormal. The results were extensive. He read for hours, finding threads that connected, patterns that emerged. The highway had always been dangerous, but the death toll had escalated dramatically in the 1990s as traffic increased. Multiple fatal accidents every year. Drunk drivers, speeding, bad weather, wildlife strikes, head-on collisions on the undivided sections. The highway earned its nickname, the Highway of Death, through accumulated tragedy. But something changed after September 16, 2001, after the 8 runners died. Holloway found reports scattered across different news sources and police databases, of strange occurrences on Highway 287. Drivers reporting seeing figures walking along the highway at night. 8 figures in running clothes, always heading north toward Laramie. Always in the same area, within a few miles of the memorial. He found accounts from truckers who swore they'd seen young men running beside their trucks at highway speed, keeping pace for miles before vanishing. One trucker, interviewed on a paranormal podcast Holloway found, described it clearly. 8 of them running in formation like they were training. I was doing 70 and they were keeping up, matching my speed exactly. Then I blinked and they were gone. More disturbing were the other reports, the ones about something else on Highway 287, something that wasn't the spirits of the dead runners. A driver in 2003 reported seeing an abandoned vehicle, stopping to investigate, encountering something tall and wrong that made them flee in terror. 20 minutes later, they heard on the radio about a major pileup that had happened exactly where they'd been planning to drive. A truck driver in 2008 called the Highway Patrol, voice shaking, saying something had appeared in his sleeper cab while he was driving. Something impossible, something that pointed at the highway ahead. He slowed down, pulled over, and witnessed a rollover accident happen right in front of him. If that thing hadn't made me slow down, I'd have been right in the middle of it. Holloway found a Reddit thread from 2019 where multiple people discussed Highway 287. One comment stood out. I drive that highway once a month for work. 3 months ago, I saw something I can't explain. Abandoned car on the shoulder. I stopped to check if anyone needed help. There was something in that car that wasn't human. I'm not crazy. I'm not making this up. It looked at me, and I ran. Got back in my car and drove 80 miles to Laramie without stopping. When I checked the news the next day, there'd been a fatal accident on 287 that night. Timestamp showed it happened right when I would have been driving through that section if I hadn't stopped at the abandoned car. That thing saved my life, and I have no idea what it was. The comment had been dismissed by most responders as creative fiction or drug-induced hallucination. But Holloway knew better. He knew exactly what that person had seen. He started searching for official reports. Used his law enforcement credentials to access databases that civilians couldn't see. Found incident reports from the Wyoming Highway Patrol going back decades. 1991, Trooper Daniel Ortiz reports seeing a tall figure standing on Highway 287 near mile marker 148. Stops to investigate. Figure vanishes. 15 minutes later, 8-car pileup occurs at mile marker 148. If Ortiz had continued his patrol instead of stopping to investigate, he would have been involved in the accident. 1997. Trooper Catherine Morrison investigates an abandoned vehicle near Tie Siding. Her report is vague, redacted in places, but includes the phrase, "encountered something I cannot adequately describe." That same night, a 3-vehicle fatal accident occurs on the same stretch of highway. Morrison requests transfer to a different district 2 weeks later. 2007. Trooper Brian Sullivan's report about an abandoned vehicle investigation is marked, "See supervisor for details." The supervisor's notes are heavily redacted, but include the phrase, "recommending psychological evaluation before return to duty." 2015. Multiple civilian reports of a tall figure in dark clothing walking along Highway 287 near Jeffrey City. Calls come in throughout the evening. That night, 3 people die in a head-on collision. Several drivers who reported the figure and slowed down to observe it were delayed just enough to avoid being part of the accident. The pattern was clear. Whatever the entity was, it had been appearing on Highway 287 for decades, always near the same section, always before major accidents, always in a way that delayed or redirected people, keeping them out of harm's way. And all the incidents clustered around a 5-mile radius centered on the memorial for the 8 cross-country runners. Holloway plotted every incident on a map, marking the locations with red pins. The pattern was undeniable. The entity appeared most frequently within 2 miles of the memorial in either direction. The sightings dropped off sharply beyond that range. Something had been bound to that place on September 16, 2001. something that had taken it upon itself to prevent more deaths on the highway of death. Holloway knew he should report this, should tell his supervisors what he'd experienced, but who would believe him? He had no evidence. The Honda had started perfectly when other officers checked it. The footprints were gone, the handprint was gone. All he had was his own testimony, and he knew how that testimony would sound. Crazy. Traumatized. Suffering from exhaustion and stress after responding to a major fatal accident. They'd put him on psychological leave, maybe force him into early retirement. His career would be over, his reputation destroyed. He'd become the trooper who lost his mind on Highway 287, who saw things that weren't there, who couldn't handle the pressure of the job. So he said nothing, wrote up his reports on the abandoned Honda and the fatal accident, leaving out anything that couldn't be explained rationally. The Honda was towed to the state police impound garage in Laramie for processing. Holloway figured that was the end of it. 3 days later, he got a call from the evidence technician who'd processed the vehicle. "Hey, Holloway, got a weird situation with that Honda you brought in?" "What kind of situation?" "It's gone." Holloway felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, it's not in the impound lot. There's no record of it being checked out, no paperwork, nothing. Security footage shows the tow truck bringing it in Friday morning, but there's no footage of it leaving. I've reviewed the entire weekend. The gate logs show nobody accessed the lot except authorized personnel, and none of them checked out any vehicles. But the Honda's not here." "That's impossible." "Yeah, well, apparently not. You want to come down and look at the security footage, because I'm looking at a locked impound lot where a vehicle just vanished into thin air." Holloway drove to the impound facility, watched the security footage himself, crystal clear video of the tow truck arriving with the silver Honda on Friday morning at 10:47 a.m. The vehicle was unloaded, photographed, tagged with an evidence number and parked in Bay 7. Then, nothing. Hours of footage showing the empty parking space, no one approaching it, no tow truck loading it, no explanation for its disappearance. By Monday morning, it was gone. Bay 7 was empty. The Honda had simply ceased to exist. Holloway and the evidence technician checked with Enterprise Rent-A-Car in Denver again. The rental company confirmed that the Honda with that vine and license plate was currently sitting in their lot. Had been there for over a week. Security footage from their lot showed it had never left. The same vehicle existing in 2 places at once, and now the second version had vanished, leaving no trace. "I don't know what to tell you," the evidence technician said, shaking his head. "In 20 years of working this job, I've never seen anything like this. Do we even file a stolen vehicle report? How do you report a stolen vehicle that shouldn't have existed in the first place?" Holloway had no answer. He was placed on mandatory administrative leave the following week. Standard procedure after a traumatic incident, they told him. He'd been first on scene at a major fatal accident, had worked the scene for hours, had been exposed to significant trauma. He needed time to process, to recover, to make sure he was psychologically ready to return to duty. Holloway knew what they were really saying. Someone had noticed something was wrong with him. Maybe it was his supervisor, who'd seen the look on his face that morning. Maybe it was Amanda, who'd called the station worried about her husband. Maybe it was Holloway himself, who couldn't hide the fact that something had fundamentally changed in him on October 13th. He was assigned to meet with Dr. Patricia Chen, a psychologist who contracted with the Wyoming Highway Patrol to evaluate officers after traumatic incidents. Holloway sat in her office, a comfortable room with soft lighting and plants on the windowsills, and tried to figure out what to say. "How are you sleeping?" Dr. Chen asked. "Fine," Holloway lied. In truth, he wasn't sleeping at all. Maybe 2 or 3 hours a night, and those hours were filled with nightmares. He'd dream about the entity sitting in his passenger seat, those impossible eyes staring at him. He'd dream about the abandoned Honda, about footprints that led nowhere, about voices in his head telling him to stop. He'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, certain that something was in the room with him. Amanda had started sleeping in the guest room. She said it was because he kept waking her up with his nightmares, but Holloway suspected it was more than that. He'd changed. She could see it. Something in him had broken on Highway 287 and she didn't know how to fix it. "Are you experiencing any intrusive thoughts?" Dr. Chen asked. Flashbacks to the accident scene? Some, Holloway admitted. That, at least, was true. He'd see flashes of the wreckage, the burning vehicles, the bodies. Normal trauma response for someone who'd worked a fatal accident. That part made sense. What he didn't tell Dr. Chen about were the other intrusive thoughts. The memory of that face pressed against his window, the feeling of presence in his patrol car, the smell of ozone and decay, the voices telling him to stop. Those thoughts came constantly, unbidden, fragmenting his concentration and making it impossible to focus on anything else. Have you been back to Highway 287 since the incident? No. Do you feel like you could return to duty on that highway? Holloway was quiet for a long moment. Dr. Chen waited patiently, pen poised over her notepad. I don't know, Holloway finally said. Maybe. I need more time. Dr. Chen made some notes, then looked at him with professional concern. Ryan, trauma response is normal. There's no shame in needing time to process what you experienced. Fatal accidents are among the most stressful incidents officers deal with. But I'm sensing there's something else bothering you. Something you're not telling me. Holloway met her eyes. He wondered what would happen if he told her the truth. If he described the entity, the impossible face, the voices, the car that existed in two places. Would she understand? Would she believe him? No. She'd diagnose him with acute stress disorder, possibly PTSD with psychotic features. She'd recommend extended leave, maybe medication. His career would effectively be over. I'm fine, he said. Just need some time. Dr. Chen didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. They talked for another 30 minutes about coping strategies, stress management, the importance of talking to his wife and family. Holloway said all the right things, agreed to all her recommendations, and left her office knowing he'd fooled absolutely no one. At home, he couldn't stop researching, spent hours every day at his computer, searching for answers, trying to understand what he'd encountered. He found academic papers about hallucinations and sleep deprivation, articles about mass hysteria and shared delusions. None of it fit. What he'd experienced was too vivid, too specific, too consistent with other reports to be a simple hallucination. He started looking into the paranormal, read everything he could find about ghosts, demons, cryptids, interdimensional beings. None of the descriptions quite matched what he'd seen. The entity wasn't transparent like a ghost. It wasn't overtly malevolent like a demon. It didn't behave like the cryptids described in folklore, Bigfoot or Mothman or any of the other creatures people claim to see. It was something else, something that existed in the spaces between what was real and what shouldn't be possible, something that had been bound to Highway 287, tasked with or choosing to prevent more deaths on a road that had already claimed too many lives. 3 weeks after the incident, Holloway made a decision. He waited until Amanda took the girls to visit her parents for the weekend. Then, at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, he drove back to Highway 287. He told himself he was just driving past, just proving to himself that he could do it. But he knew where he was really going. He drove south from Laramie toward Colorado, retracing his patrol route from that October night. The highway was empty at this hour, just his headlights cutting through darkness. He passed Jeffrey City, the ghost town dark and silent, past Thai siding. And then he saw it, the memorial cross, illuminated by his headlights. Someone had left fresh flowers again, white roses this time. Holloway pulled onto the shoulder and parked about 50 yards from the memorial, turned off his engine, sat in the darkness and silence, waiting. An hour passed. Nothing happened. The highway remained empty. No traffic in either direction, just wind and darkness and the distant howl of coyotes somewhere out in the rangeland. Holloway was about to start the car and leave, accepting that maybe he'd never understand what had happened when he saw them. 8 figures, walking along the shoulder of the highway. Young men in running clothes, shorts, technical shirts, running shoes. They moved with the easy gait of experienced distance runners, their strides matching in the rhythm that comes from thousands of miles of training together. They walked past Holloway's car, not 20 feet away. None of them looked at him. They showed no awareness of his presence. Their faces were visible in the ambient light from his dashboard. Young, focused, peaceful. Holloway recognized some of them from the photos he'd seen in news articles about the 2001 tragedy. He watched them continue north up the highway, toward Laramie, toward home. Their forms gradually faded into the darkness, not disappearing suddenly, but just walking until the night swallowed them, and they were gone. Holloway sat in his car, tears streaming down his face. He didn't know why he was crying. Sadness for those young men, maybe. Relief that what he'd seen on October 13th wasn't just a hallucination. Grief for his own lost innocence. The comfortable certainty that reality followed rules he understood. He wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and looked toward the memorial. The tall figure was standing there, even though he'd been expecting it, hoping for it. Holloway's heart seized in his chest. The entity stood motionless beside the cross, that impossible form dark against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky. 7 feet tall or more, proportions all wrong, existing in a way that hurt to look at even from this distance. Holloway's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to start the car and drive away, to flee like he'd fled on October 13th. But he'd come here for answers, for understanding. And he wasn't going to run this time. He opened his car door and stepped out into the cold night air. The entity turned its head toward him. Even from 50 yards away, even in near total darkness, Holloway could feel those impossible eyes on him, watching, evaluating. Holloway walked toward the memorial, his legs shaking but carrying him forward. He stopped about 10 yards away, close enough to see the entity clearly, far enough to maintain some psychological distance. Up close, it was even more disturbing than he remembered. The way it existed on the edge of visual comprehension, forcing his brain to work overtime to process what he was seeing. The way it seemed to be made of shadows and something else, something that reflected light without being solid. The way its presence caused the air around it to ripple slightly, like heat shimmer on a summer highway. For a long moment, they just stood there. Man and entity, trooper and something that shouldn't exist, staring at each other across a divide that shouldn't be crossable. Then Holloway understood. It hit him with absolute clarity, a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than rational thought. This thing had been here since September 16th, 2001. Maybe it had always existed in this place, drawn to the highway by all the death and tragedy that had accumulated here over the decades. But that night, that terrible night when 8 young men were killed in an instant, had bound it here, anchored it, given it purpose. The 8 runners were still here too, walking their eternal route, trying endlessly to complete a journey home they'd never finish. And this entity, this impossible thing from somewhere else, had appointed itself their guardian. Or maybe they'd called it here. Maybe their deaths, so sudden and violent and wrong, had torn a hole in reality, and this thing had slipped through to prevent more holes from being torn. It used the abandoned car as a lure, a mystery that would make people stop, investigate, change their timing and route. It appeared in vehicles, terrifying drivers into slowing down or pulling over. It stood on the highway, forcing truckers to swerve. All of it designed to delay people, to keep them out of the path of oncoming disaster. It couldn't prevent the accidents. It wasn't omnipotent, wasn't God. But it could see them coming somehow, could sense the convergence of factors that would lead to tragedy. And it did what it could in the only way it knew how to save the people who might otherwise die. The entity raised one arm, that same gesture Holloway had seen on October 13th. But this time, it wasn't pointing at an accident. It raised its impossibly long arm and gestured toward Holloway. Not threatening, not beckoning, just acknowledging. You understand now, the gesture seemed to say. You see what I am, what I do, why I exist here. Holloway nodded slowly. You saved my life. The entity didn't respond. Couldn't respond, probably. Whatever it was, wherever it came from, speech wasn't part of its nature. But Holloway felt something. Not words, not thoughts exactly. More like understanding transmitted directly into his mind. Yes. How many others? The entity tilted its head slightly, a disturbingly bird-like movement. No answer came. Maybe it didn't know. Maybe the number was too high to communicate. Maybe the question didn't make sense to something that existed outside normal time and space. "The 8 runners," Holloway said. "Are they here? Are they suffering?" This time the response was clearer. An emotion more than a thought. Something Holloway could only interpret as sadness mixed with determination. The runners were here. Yes. Trapped or choosing to stay. Holloway couldn't tell which, but they weren't suffering. They walked their eternal route north toward home, and maybe that brought them some kind of peace. And maybe their presence, their spirits or echoes or whatever remained of them, gave the entity power to do what it did. "Thank you," Holloway whispered, "for saving me, for saving everyone else. I don't know what you are or where you came from, but thank you." The entity stood motionless for another moment, then it lowered its arm, and just like before it was gone, not walked away, not faded, just ceased to be there, as if it had never existed at all. Holloway stood alone beside the memorial, wind whipping around him, carrying the smell of sagebrush and cold earth. He looked at the cross, at the 8 pairs of running shoes weathered by years of Wyoming weather. He reached out and touched one of the shoes gently. "I understand now," he said quietly, not sure if anyone or anything could hear him. "I understand what's happening here, and I won't tell anyone. I won't expose what you're doing. You're trying to save lives, and I'm not going to interfere with that." The wind picked up, almost like an answer. Holloway walked back to his car, started the engine, and drove home. He didn't look back. 2 days later, he submitted his resignation to the Wyoming Highway Patrol. The letter was brief. He thanked the department for 11 years of service, cited personal reasons and a desire to spend more time with his family, made no mention of Highway 287, of entities that shouldn't exist, of cars that appeared in 2 places at once, just a simple, professional resignation from a trooper who decided it was time to move on. His supervisor tried to talk him out of it. "You're one of our best, Holloway. Don't make a decision like this when you're still processing trauma. Take more time. We'll extend your leave as long as you need." But Holloway was certain. He couldn't go back to Highway 287. Couldn't patrol that stretch of road knowing what he knew, seeing what he'd seen. Every night would be wondering if he'd encounter the entity again. Every abandoned vehicle would be a potential mystery he'd have to investigate. Every car accident would make him question whether it could have been prevented if the entity had intervened. He'd crossed a line on October 13th. He'd seen behind the curtain of reality, glimpsed something that humans weren't meant to see, and that knowledge had changed him fundamentally. He could never go back to being the rational, by-the-book trooper he'd been before. That version of Ryan Holloway had died on Highway 287, replaced by someone who knew that reality was far stranger and more terrible than anyone wanted to believe. The resignation was effective November 3rd, 2023. His last day was quiet, cleaned out his locker, turned in his badge and weapon, said goodbye to colleagues who'd been friends and partners for over a decade. Some of them knew something had happened to him, could see the change in his eyes. But nobody pressed him for details. In law enforcement, you learned to respect when someone wanted privacy, especially when they were leaving the job. Amanda was relieved. She'd been terrified ever since that night, seeing her husband transform into someone haunted and hollow. She supported his decision to resign, supported his plan to find work that didn't involve patrolling dark highways in the middle of the night. By January 2024, the Holloway family had moved to Colorado Springs. Ryan found work as a security consultant for a private firm. The pay was actually better than highway patrol, the hours were normal, and he never had to worry about encountering anything impossible. But the knowledge stayed with him. The memory of those eyes looking at him from impossible angles, the smell of ozone and decay, the voices telling him to stop. At night, he still kept every light in the house on. Amanda had stopped complaining about the electric bills. She understood, in the way spouses understand without needing explanations, that her husband needed to see, needed to know that the darkness wasn't hiding anything that shouldn't exist. Holloway refused all interview requests about his time with the Highway Patrol. A journalist tracked down his address in Colorado Springs, knocked on his door, asked if he'd talk about the rumors surrounding his resignation, about reports that he'd seen something on Highway 287 that had made him quit. Holloway listened politely, then said just 5 words. "I can't help you. Goodbye." He closed the door and never spoke about it again. The case file from October 13th still exists, buried in Wyoming Highway Patrol records. The dashcam footage from that night exists, though it shows only darkness and empty highway, the camera apparently unable to capture what Holloway saw with his own eyes. The testimony from his debriefing exists, carefully redacted and marked confidential, never meant for public release. But I obtained copies, from sources I can't reveal, through methods I won't describe. And what I've told you tonight is based on those documents, on interviews with people who knew Holloway, on my own investigation into Highway 287 and its history. Highway 287 remains one of the most dangerous roads in Wyoming. The Highway of Death continues to claim lives with grim regularity. Since Holloway's encounter in October 2023, there have been 14 more fatal accidents on that stretch between Laramie and Fort Collins. But here's what's strange. In almost every case, there were reports of unusual occurrences minutes before the accident. A driver called dispatch said they'd seen a tall figure standing on the highway. A trucker reported something appearing in his cab that made him slow down. A family stopped at an abandoned vehicle, took 20 minutes to investigate, and missed being part of a pile-up by less than a minute. The reports keep coming, year after year. Different people, different circumstances, but the same basic story. Something appears on Highway 287 before major accidents. Something that delays people, changes their route, puts them anywhere but in the path of disaster. Wyoming Highway Patrol won't comment on any paranormal aspects of the highway. Their official position is clear. We focus on traffic safety and accident prevention through traditional law enforcement methods. We don't speculate about unexplained phenomena, but unofficially among the troopers who work that highway, there's a different story. The veterans have a nickname for night patrol on Highway 287. They call it Guardian Duty. They don't explain it to rookies. The veterans figure the new ones will either see it for themselves or they won't. You can't prepare someone for that encounter. You can only hope they survive it with their sanity mostly intact. Some of the newer troopers think the nickname is just dark humor, a reference to guarding a dangerous stretch of highway. But the veterans know better. They know there's an actual guardian out there. Something that appears in the darkness and saves lives in the only way it knows how, by being terrifying enough to make people stop. The memorial for the 8 cross-country runners still stands on Highway 287, just south of Tie Siding. 23 years after that terrible September night. The cross has been replaced a few times, weathered by decades of Wyoming wind and snow, but someone maintains it. Someone always leaves fresh flowers, fresh running shoes, fresh notes. On September 16th every year, people gather for memorial runs in Laramie, in Gillette, in Douglas and Cheyenne and Riverton, and all the hometowns of those 8 young men. 8 miles for 8 lives cut short. 8 miles for 8 runners who never made it home. And sometimes, late at night, drivers on Highway 287 report seeing them. 8 figures in running clothes walking north toward Laramie. Always 8 of them, always heading home. The descriptions are consistent. Young men, athletic builds, moving with the easy gait of experienced runners. They walk along the shoulder, never acknowledging passing vehicles, never stopping, just walking their eternal route, searching for an ending that never comes. The reports are dismissed as grief, as imagination, as the power of suggestion. But they keep coming, year after year, different people who've never heard of each other giving identical descriptions. 8 runners walking north trying to get home, and on the darkest nights when the moon is new and the highway stretches empty in both directions, when the wind howls across the high plains and the temperature drops below freezing, some drivers report seeing something else. A tall figure standing beside the memorial, or walking along the shoulder, or sitting in an abandoned vehicle that appears and disappears with no explanation. A figure that's too tall, with proportions that hurt to look at, existing in a way that makes reality feel thin and fragile. Most people who see it don't stop. They accelerate past, telling themselves it was a trick of the headlights, a shadow that looked like something else. They drive on to their destination, shaken but safe, never knowing they might have just been saved from an accident that was waiting ahead. An accident they would have encountered if they hadn't slowed down to stare at something impossible, if they hadn't changed their timing by just those few critical seconds. The entity continues its work, appearing, delaying, redirecting, saving lives one terrified driver at a time. How many people has it saved since September 16th, 2001? How many accidents that never happened because someone saw something that made them change their route? How many families still intact because a parent or child encountered something impossible and arrived home 5 minutes later than planned? We'll never know the full count. The entity can't tell us, and the people it saves usually don't realize they've been saved. They just know they saw something strange, felt compelled to slow down or stop, and then continued on their way. Most of them probably never check the news, never learn about the accident that happened exactly where they would have been if not for a mysterious delay. But the evidence is there, scattered through decades of reports and testimonies and unexplained encounters, a pattern of people being delayed by the impossible, only to discover that the delay saved their life. Ryan Holloway is one of the few who knows for certain, who saw the entity and then saw the wreckage he would have been part of, who understands exactly what was done for him that October night. He lives quietly in Colorado now, works his security consultant job, coaches his daughter's soccer teams, attends parent-teacher conferences and dance recitals and all the normal things parents do. From the outside, he looks like any other suburban dad living an ordinary life. But people who know him well say he's different. His wife Amanda told a close friend that Ryan isn't the man she married. He's still kind, still loving, still a good father. But something in him changed. Something broke or awakened or transformed. He sees the world differently now, understands that reality has cracks in it, thin places where impossible things leak through. He keeps every light in the house on at night, all of them. The electric bills are astronomical. Amanda has stopped trying to convince him it's unnecessary. She's learned that some things can't be argued with, can't be rationalized away. Her husband needs to see, needs to know what's in the darkness. And if keeping every light burning helps him sleep, then that's what they'll do. Holloway refuses to drive through Wyoming. Ever. His parents still live in Cheyenne. When he visits them, he flies. When work requires travel that would take him through the state, he finds alternative routes or turns down the assignment. His employer thinks it's an eccentricity, maybe some kind of childhood trauma associated with his home state. But Amanda knows the truth. And late at night, when she wakes up and finds Ryan standing at the bedroom window, staring out at their quiet suburban street, she knows what he's doing. He's watching the shadows between streetlights, the places where darkness pools despite all the artificial light humanity uses to push it back. He's wondering what else is out there, what other impossible things exist in those thin spaces where reality grows uncertain. He'll never talk about what he saw on Highway 287. The handful of people who've managed to track him down and ask about his resignation have all been turned away with the same brief response. "I can't help you, goodbye." There's no hostility in his refusal, no anger, just a quiet certainty that some things can't be shared, shouldn't be explained. Because how do you tell someone about something that breaks every law of physics and biology and reason? How do you describe something that exists between what's real and what can't be real? How do you convey the terror of seeing something that your brain can't process, that your eyes can't properly focus on because it violates fundamental assumptions about how the world works? You can't. So Holloway doesn't try. He carries the knowledge alone, a secret weight that changed him forever. The recordings of his testimony exist, locked away in departmental files marked confidential. The psychologist's evaluation exists, carefully worded to suggest trauma response without explicitly saying Holloway experienced a psychotic break. The dashcam footage exists, showing only darkness. Whatever the entity is, it doesn't register on digital cameras. And now you know too. Highway 287 continues to wind through the high plains of Wyoming and the foothills of Colorado, carrying travelers between Laramie and Fort Collins, past Jeffrey City, where uranium dreams died and the buildings still stand empty, past Thai Siding, where 8 young men died on a September night 23 years ago, past the memorial with its cross and running shoes and flowers that always appear fresh, The Wyoming Department of Transportation has plans for improvements, more widening, better lighting, additional median barriers, rumble strips and warning signs, and all the engineering solutions that might make the highway safer. And maybe they will. Maybe the death toll will drop. Maybe fewer families will experience that terrible knock on the door, that moment when everything changes forever. But the troopers who work night patrol on Highway 287 know something the engineers don't. They know that some of the safety on that road has nothing to do with construction or traffic enforcement. It comes from something else. Something that appears in the darkness and changes everything for the people who see it. They call it guardian duty, and they mean it literally. The entity is still out there, still appearing, still doing its impossible work of preventing tragedies before they happen, still terrifying drivers and troopers into changing their routes, their timing, their fate. How long will it continue? Forever. Until Highway 287 is finally made completely safe. Until the last person who remembers the 8 runners has died and their memory fades from living consciousness. Nobody knows. Maybe not even the entity itself knows. Maybe it's trapped there, bound by forces it doesn't understand, unable to leave until some condition is met. Or maybe it chooses to stay, finding purpose in its impossible mission. 8 young men died on Highway 287 on September 16, 2001. Justin Lambert Belanger, Cody Brown, Kyle Johnson, Joshua Jones, Morgan McClelland, Kevin Salverson, Nicholas Shabron, Shane Chateau. 8 lives cut short by a drunk driver's terrible decision. They never made it home that night, but maybe, in some way, they're still trying. Still walking north toward Laramie, toward the finish line they never got to cross. And maybe their continued presence, their spirits or echoes or whatever remains when someone dies too young and too suddenly, gives power to something that prevents more deaths. Maybe that's their legacy. Not just the memory of their lives, not just the pain of their loss, but the countless unknown people who've been saved by an impossible guardian that exists because they died. It's a terrible kind of immortality, but maybe it's also beautiful in its own tragic way. A transformation of grief into protection, of loss into salvation, of death into life. This has been Void Case Files. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers by New Year's. We're posting daily, and I promise you, the cases only get darker and stranger from here. Stay safe out there, and if you're ever driving late at night on a lonely highway, any highway, not just 287, and something tells you to stop, to slow down, to change your route, listen to that instinct. Don't question it. Don't try to be rational about it. Just listen. Because sometimes the things we can't explain are trying to save our lives. Sometimes the impossible reaches across the boundary between its world and ours, and it does so for reasons we may never fully understand. The entity on Highway 287 isn't trying to hurt you, it's trying to save you. The price of that salvation is the knowledge you'll carry forever, that reality is thinner than you thought, that impossible things exist in the margins, and that sometimes they're the only thing standing between you and oblivion. Ryan Holloway knows that now. He'll never be the same, but he's alive, and so are countless others who saw something impossible one night, on a dark highway, and let their fear or curiosity change their path, delay their journey by those few critical minutes that made all the difference. Drive safe. Keep your eyes on the road. Watch for the unexpected. And remember, some highways have guardians that don't appear in any training manual or policy handbook. They exist in the spaces between what we know and what we can't explain. In the thin places where reality stretches and sometimes rips. And sometimes, just sometimes, they reach across that boundary to save us from ourselves. The question isn't whether you believe in things like the entity on Highway 287. Belief doesn't matter. It exists whether you accept it or not. The real question is simpler and more terrifying. If you see it, will you listen? Will you let your terror save you? Will you accept the impossible and change your path? Or will you rationalize it away, convince yourself it was nothing, and continue on to whatever fate was waiting for you? That's the choice. That's always the choice. The 8 runners chose to drive home on Highway 287 that September night. It was a choice that killed them. But maybe their deaths created something that's been saving people ever since. Maybe tragedy can transform into protection if the circumstances are right and the boundary between worlds is thin enough. I don't have all the answers. Ryan Holloway doesn't have all the answers. The entity certainly can't provide answers, existing as it does beyond language and human comprehension. What we have are stories, testimonies, reports scattered across decades, a pattern of impossible encounters that prevent tragedies, and the knowledge, certain, undeniable knowledge, that something is out there on Highway 287, watching, waiting, trying to save us. Whether that brings you comfort or terror, I can't say. Maybe both. Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe the things that save us should terrify us a little. Maybe that's what keeps us humble, keeps us aware that we don't understand everything about this world we inhabit. Highway 287 remains open. Cars and trucks drive it every day, carrying people and cargo between Wyoming and Colorado. Most of those trips are uneventful, normal. The drivers arrive at their destinations safely, never knowing about the guardian that watches over that stretch of road. But some drivers see more, encounter something that changes them, and they carry that knowledge for the rest of their lives, a secret weight that makes them different from everyone who hasn't seen. If you ever drive Highway 287, especially at night, especially in that section between Laramie and Fort Collins, pay attention, watch for the memorial, look for the figures walking north, and if you see an abandoned vehicle sitting too perfectly on the shoulder, if you encounter something tall and wrong that shouldn't exist, if you hear voices in your head telling you to stop, listen, just listen. Your life might depend on it. This has been Void Case Files. Subscribe, share this story. Help us reach 1,000 by New Year's, because the world is stranger than you think, reality is thinner than you believe, and sometimes the impossible is the only thing standing between you and disaster. Stay safe out there, and remember, the highway of death has a guardian. Whether that makes you feel safer or more afraid is up to you.